Downtown Decatur, it's the Faber Files. Hello, I'm your host, Bill Faber. Because democracy demands debate, we present this program of public issues and interests. And tonight we have a real debate between the candidates for State's Attorney's Office here in Macon County, the Republican candidate, Dan Hassinger, the Democratic candidate, Jay Scott. And the gentlemen will introduce themselves to you in just a moment. The rules of the debate are we're going to have a 2-minute opening by each of the candidates, followed by a series of questions. The first question, the first part of the question, the answer will have 2 minutes to answer, followed by a 2-minute response by the second candidate, and then a 1-minute rebuttal. At the conclusion of the question time, we will have a closing statement of 2 minutes by each of the candidates. The winners of this debate are not the candidates. The winners are the voters and the citizens of Macon County. And I really respect the candidates for having the courage to appear before this televised debate to share their views and their thoughts with the voters here in Macon County. So we'll have the candidates introduce themselves. The opening statement will be begun by Jay Scott, the Democrat candidate.
Well, thank you very much, Bill, for hosting this debate. My name is Jay Scott. I'm a candidate for Macon County State's Attorney. I've been a prosecutor now for over 25 years. I started out at the bottom and I worked my way up through every position in the office to the number 2 spot of first assistant, which I've held now for over 6 years. I've prosecuted every type of case that our office can possibly see, from speeding tickets up to first-degree murder cases and everything in between. During my career, my felony trial conviction rate stands at 91%. During the 10 years that I was head of the felony drug prosecution unit, I had a 97% trial conviction rate. I've prosecuted 20 first-degree murder trials, including 4 death penalty cases. I've been on part of some of the most complicated, horrific crimes and prosecuting them that ever occurred here in Macon County. I'm running on my experience, my record. Experience is important in any job, but it's especially important when we're talking about the chief law enforcement officer for the county. The state's attorney has to make decisions every day, oftentimes on a moment's notice, that affect people's lives, whether it's a suspect or a defendant, or the victims of a crime, or the county as a whole, because what it all boils down to is a matter of public safety. If we have bad decisions made by the state's attorney because of inexperience, then bad things are going to happen. You're going to see innocent people prosecuted, you're going to see victims deprived of justice, and you're going to see violent criminals put back out on the street. And when that happens, everybody in the community suffers. The people of Macon County deserve to have the most qualified and experienced person serving as their next top prosecutor. That's why I'm running, and that's why I'm asking for your vote on November 6th.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Faber, for hosting the debate. My name is Dan Hassinger, and I am the Republican candidate for Macon County State's Attorney. My path that's led me here to run for office has been unusual and unexpected. I've been practicing law here in Decatur with my partner, Jim Brinkotter, for the past 2 years, and I also have an office in Springfield. But prior to that, I was a police officer for 15 years. 8 years with the Decatur Police Department and 7 years with the Illinois Secretary of State Police in Springfield. And throughout my law enforcement career, I've always demanded more from myself than anybody else could ever expect. That's why I excelled at every task I was given, every position that I held, and ultimately found myself in a leadership role. In 2004, something happened that changed my life and it changed my career path. A friend of mine was shot and killed by a gunman inside the Illinois State Capitol in Springfield, Illinois. I arrived shortly after that, and it was a very difficult thing to do, but I had to set that aside and do my job as a police officer investigating crime. I quickly established a task force, identified the killer, and we apprehended him within hours. It was a very difficult time, but at the end of that case, it made me realize something, that life is short and you should follow your dreams. I made the decision to follow my dreams to become a lawyer, and I just had a few obstacles in my way. I didn't have a bachelor's degree, and I wasn't quite sure how I would manage law school working full-time and raising a family.
The first question then will be for Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott, some people describe the state's attorney as the chief law enforcement official, while others say the state's attorney is the people's lawyer. How do you view the role of the Macon County State's Attorney, and how do you plan to lead the office?
Well, the state's attorney is the chief law enforcement officer for the county. It's the most powerful law enforcement position in the county, and that's why we need to choose wisely when we determine who's going to serve in that position. I've heard it called the people's lawyer as well. We're limited from what we do to prosecuting law violations. We also have a child support division where we collect and get child support order for people, and we provide advice to county office holders and the county board. But as far as representing people, we don't do that. I intend to lead the same way I've led over the past 25 years. Out of 20 of the years I've been with this office, I've served in a supervisory capacity one way or another. And I've seen our office grow from a good office to a great office, and we need experienced leadership. We've had good leadership from a prosecution standpoint from Jack Ahola over the last 8 years, who was a career prosecutor like myself, and that's the kind of person you need running that office, that knows every job in that office, how to prosecute every type of case, and so I want to keep my leadership at work for the people of Macon County as our next state's attorney.
Mr. Hassinger.
Well, I definitely think it's a leadership role. I mean, chief law enforcement officer of the county is just that. You know, I have 15 years of experience in law enforcement as a police officer. I have 2 years experience as a defense attorney. I've seen every side of the criminal justice system. I think it's very important that we understand why I'm running for office. I'm frustrated with the lack of public service, the lack of fiscal responsibility, and ultimately the lack of justice in the office right now. My opponent has been in leadership role for a long time. He's had an opportunity to change some of those things that have frustrated me, which led me to run for office. I don't think that those things are being done. I have fresh new ideas, a new way of running the office, and that's why I hope that people will vote for me on November 6th.
Mr. Scott, a rebuttal?
Well, a large part of my opponent's platform is attacking the budget of the office. Whether we agree or disagree with what's been done, those are not my budgets. I'm not the state's attorney. I never have been the state's attorney. We do need change in the office. We need to fine-tune things, make things more efficient. I have the advantage of knowing what the strengths and weaknesses are of the employees in the office, and I have the advantage of having been in prosecution for over 25 years. And it's not something you can just jump into and learn on the go. You need a professional person in that office, somebody that's got experience.
Second question, first for Mr. Hassinger. The war on drugs. Since President Reagan declared the war on drugs 30 years ago, the prison population has risen from 300,000 to 2 million in America, the highest incarceration rate of all nations in the world. The majority of the convictions are for drug possession. In 1973, the National Advisory Commission on Criminal Justice Standards stated that there is overwhelming evidence that prisons and jails actually create crime, not reduce it. What is your position regarding prosecution of citizens for nonviolent drug possession?
Well, my position is simply to, wherever possible, use programs like the diversion program, which the state's attorney's office has in place right now, as well as the drug court, which they also have in place, for nonviolent offenders. But you know, you have to also understand that drug addiction is a very serious problem in society today. It is at the root of a lot of major crimes. And where you have to be careful, and you have to carefully choose the cases that you prosecute and those that you intend to aggressively try, and with the intention of sending folks to prison, because there is an overpopulation problem. That's where you know, my law enforcement experience and seeing that firsthand and identifying how the drug problem interacts with society will help me, you know, make the best choice of who goes into a diversion program and who goes off to prison.
Mr. Scott?
Well, I was the drug prosecutor, head of the felony drug prosecution unit for 10 years, so I have a lot of firsthand experience with prosecuting drug cases. Typically, we don't see possession offenses, those offenders going to prison. I set up our diversion program that Mr. Hassinger mentioned in 1992. I started our deferred prosecution program in 1995, which is for first-time drug offenders. And we try to work with them in the community. I was also the head of the committee that set up our first drug court back in 1997. So with possessory offenses, we try to get people to treatment in the community, And so to break the cycle of addiction so that they don't keep committing a crime of possessing and the crimes that go along with it to feed their habits. So we've been very active in the community. We now have a new drug court that started up this last year. And we have high hopes for the success. The drug court is a good program. Sometimes people don't give us a choice and we have to end up sending them to prison. But as a drug prosecutor, I was very tough on drug dealers. That's where the problem starts. They're people that live off other people's miseries, and I always tried to get the stiffest possible sentences I could on drug dealers because they're profiteers, like I said, living off other people's misery.
Mr. Hassinger, your rebuttal?
I just would add that it's also very important to realize that the people that do get arrested for possession charges oftentimes are committing other crimes such as burglary and theft, and you have to be able to separate and to make a distinction between, which problem do you resolve? And oftentimes it's a crime against a person or crime against property, and you need to prosecute those cases, if they're more serious. And maybe you dismiss the drug case if you've got a more serious crime where someone's been harmed or some property issues are at stake here. So I think that there's more to it than just a felony possession, people going to prison. I don't think that's the case. I think decisions need to be made on the companion cases that go along with them.
Third question for Mr. Scott. Regarding plea bargaining. The criminal justice system is overloaded, so it uses a tool called plea bargaining. Many people criticize its use. How do you employ plea bargaining? How would you employ plea bargaining? And what do you say to its critics?
Well, plea bargaining sometimes gets a bad rap. People think you're making a deal and you're selling out a case. It's a necessary part of the criminal justice system. I, over the last 25 years, the way plea bargaining is handled, you make an offer on a case. If we look at a case, we have to evaluate what the strength of our evidence is, the person's previous history, what kind of a sentence this person is going to get after going to trial, or if he just comes in and pleads guilty. So we have to be realistic. And so we do make an offer that's in line with the person's character, his previous history, the seriousness of the offense, and we oftentimes, usually give somebody a little bit of credit if they come in and own up to what they did, because that's just, they don't put us through the hassle of going through a trial and the expense of going through a trial. You may give them a little bit of a break, but it is a necessary part of our system. If we had to try every case, we file over 1,800 felonies per year now here in Macon County, and while our case numbers are going down, that's a lot of cases, and it's impossible to try them all. So it's not selling out a case, it's making a reasonable offer based on all the circumstances.
Mr. Hassinger, your reply?
Well, I think that, a lot of those things in plea bargaining before you make an offer need to be done before you actually file a charge and evaluate the evidence a little more closely. Plea bargaining is a necessary thing. You can't try all those cases. I think that if you know what the likely outcome is at conviction at trial, if judges to make a determination on what the sentence is to be, that plays an effect in your evaluation of the facts and how strong your case is. But I think a lot more needs to be done before you actually file a charge.
Mr. Scott, your rebuttal?
Well, as the person who's in charge of filing all felony charges in the county except for sex crimes and domestic violence, we do take that into account. You always have to look, do you have enough evidence to file a charge? But there's also sometimes where you have to go ahead on what's a tough case, and you have to make a decision. We know this person committed the crime. It may be a tough case to prove, but we don't file charges that we can't back up. We have to have probable cause. That's part of our ethical duty as prosecutors. So there's a lot of evaluation that goes on prior to charges being filed.
The next question for Mr. Hassinger. Regarding crime victims. In the criminal justice process, citizens who are victims of crime often feel like they're left out. They complain that they have a hard time contacting assistant state's attorneys who are handling their case. What can be done to allow citizens more and easier ways to talk to the state's attorney's office?
Well, I think that the victim witness unit that's currently in place in the state's attorney's office, they are tasked with that. And if people are complaining of that, then that shows that there's a problem there. If elected as state's attorney, then what I would do would be to make sure that we have a team of people in place that if we identify a report that comes in that the police department generated, and we've got a victim of violent crime or a victim that we feel is in need of help from assistance from our office, that we're going to make sure that we are proactive and that we contact them and that we evaluate. A lot of times we're going to pick up evidence to help prosecute a case, or determine that that the case is really not going to hold up in court. So I think that the fact that that is an issue, and there's a unit in place inside the office right now that's not addressing that, is a sign that we have management issues.
Mr. Scott, your reply?
Well, we do have a victim witness program in place that keeps in close contact with the victims. We have a gun violence victim coordinator that people rave about. These complaints, I don't hear them as a supervising attorney. That's what I'm there for. If anybody has a complaint about one of the assistants, they need to come to me, and I don't hear those kind of complaints. And I can only base what's going to happen under my administration if I'm elected on what I've done. I've always had an open door policy. If you read the Herald and Review, or if you visit my website, you see some of the endorsements that the victims of cases that I've had over the years have sent in, and I've been very touched by how they view what I did for them. And I've made lifelong friends out of some of those victims because they're going through a very difficult time in their life. I've been there for them whenever they wanted to talk to me, had an open door policy, met with them, tried to explain everything I could to them, and that's what I will continue doing, and that's what I'll make sure every assistant under me does if I'm elected. And again, if anybody's got a complaint, they can come to me as first assistant or as the elected state's attorney.
Mr. Hassinger, your rebuttal?
I would just say that Mr. Scott is running on his experience in a supervisory position for the last 6 years. And if he's not aware of complaints or aware of a problem, then that's a problem. He can't take credit for the successes and then also just pass off the failures as the current state's attorney's problem. I think that the reason that I'm running is because in the primary, Mr. Scott said that he wouldn't change a thing, that things are fine. He's going to continue to run the office as is. And I think that I can do a better job and serve the people better.
Mr. Scott, the next question for you regarding proposed changes to the state's attorney's office. Our community lives in difficult times. There's little money, the budgets are in crisis, but there's plenty of crime, although it's reduced a little bit. What change, if any, will you bring to the Macon County State's Attorney's Office, and why?
Well, I never said I wouldn't change anything about the office. I've said our office is strong. We need to keep it that way. There's always room for improvement, and there's always changes that can be made so that we can do things better in our office. The changes I want to see, number one, is to have a gang prosecution unit. We have a significant gang problem. It's not like it was back in the early 2000s, late 90s when we had more organized crime gangs, but we have a gang problem, and we need to address that, have good prosecutors assigned to a gang prosecution unit so we get the stiffest possible penalties. Also work with the community to try to find ways to get our young people involved in some other kind of lifestyle. I also want to have an elderly victims crime unit. We're seeing a distinct increase in those types of crimes over the past few years. It's one of my pet peeves when people pick on the elderly. So again, I want to have experienced prosecutors assigned to those cases to make sure that they handle them correctly, because they're oftentimes very difficult cases. I also want to have a zero tolerance policy on criminals that use or possess guns. Law-abiding citizens have a lot of rules they have to follow in the state of Illinois, and if criminals thumb their nose at those, they're out to get hammered, and they will if I'm elected state's attorney. And the other thing is I want to increase the involvement of our employees with community groups and organizations. I've been very active with a lot of boards and committees and organizations over the years, and it's been a real eye-opener for me. The more feedback we get from people in the community, the better we'll be able to do our job there in the office. So those are some of the changes that I want to make if I'm elected state's attorney. And these are, again, positions filled from inside the office, so it's not like we're growing the office, making it bigger, expanding it. These are things that are going to improve what we do at no additional cost to the taxpayers.
Mr. Hassinger, your reply.
Well, that's part of the problem. I mean, he says he wants to make changes, but he's really adding to the problem. He says that this is going to occur at no additional cost to the taxpayers. Well, I ask you, Mr. Scott, are you going to fund any part of this with a grant of any type? Because if so, that is an additional cost to the taxpayers. That's where grant money comes from, federal tax dollars. There's a problem up there right now with the way that the office is financed. Millions of dollars in grant money has come into the office. The size of the office has grown tremendously. The office has handed out on average 29% pay increase over the last 5 years to its employees. And where's the revenue going to come from? Currently, many of the grants are expiring, and the taxpayer in the county is going to be on the hook for the increase in pension contributions in employee salary increases in a time where we're trying to recover from the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. Our state deficit has grown from 37 to 43 billion dollars, and we have an $82 billion unfunded pension liability. Those are concerns that concern me. I think the taxpayers are concerned, the other citizens are concerned, and apparently Mr. Scott can't see the forest for the trees in his way. He just wants to continue to add to the problem.
Mr. Scott, your rebuttal.
Well, I don't think my opponent understands how things work in the prosecution office, and that's part of the problem. We can make units, we make units all the time within the office, and we don't have to fund them with a grant. As I said earlier, we take experienced prosecutors, we assign them to these units. We've had units that we've created over the years, and it doesn't add to taxpayer liabilities. I don't need a grant to have a gang prosecution unit or an elderly victims crime unit. We talk about unfunded pensions. The pension I'm under is totally funded. So we're not growing the office, we're not making it bigger. The taxpayer's not going to be on the hook for any grants that go away. If we can keep the people there, we keep them. If they have to go at the end of a grant, they go. If we can find other ways to do what those people are doing, we do it. So this fallacy of saying that a grant's going to go away and we won't be able to prosecute cases, or we're going to go back to the county board and ask for more money, is simply not true, and it shows how little my opponent knows about what we do in the office.
Next question for Mr. Hassinger, and this a follow-up with regard to the budgetary issues. Money is short. The county board keeps trying to cut the budget where it can. Many departments and offices have been asked to reduce their budget. How can the state's attorney's office do a complete job for the community if it doesn't have the money, manpower, and resources? For example, the parole office are in jeopardy. What should taxpayers think or do about this situation?
Well, I think you have to consider what the problems are. And just let me say that parole is actually a Department of Corrections issue, and probation would be the county problem at issue. You know, I think that government is very slow to catch up with the trends in management and leadership practices. We need to be operating more flat. You know, for the last several years, everybody's had to do more with less. And I think that I can come in there and go over the budget line by line, find clear abuses and wasteful spending that can be cut out, and make the office operationally more flat. I think it'll give you know, efficiency to the office, and when we're not making decisions based on revenue, but rather the right thing to do, then that's when justice is restored to the people. And I think that that's what, and I'm out campaigning in the community, talking to people, and that's what they want. That's what I hear, and that's what I plan to do if I'm elected.
Mr. Scott, your reply.
We do have to have adequate funding, the same as the Decatur Police Department, the Sheriff's Office, because public safety is the #1 concern of the state's attorney. If we don't have a strong office and continue to have a strong office, then everybody's going to be affected. If our crime rates are declining, if they go back the other way because of cheap justice, then nobody's going to want to move to Decatur, nobody's going to want to set up a business here, nobody's going to want to stay in Decatur. We have safety here, safe streets. We do have a lot of crime, but we stay on top of it because we've got good, effective prosecutors in our office. And Mr. Hassinger points out, well, he'll go through and find ways to save. Well, what are the specifics? It's easy to say that. We're going to cut money here, we're going to cut money there, but he gives no details about anything of how he's going to cut money from our budget. And a common thing that he keeps saying is we make decisions based on revenue, and the grants have strings attached to them. And the way we settle cases, that's simply not true. And again, a good prosecutor has to stick to the facts. If you don't stick to the facts in court, that's when violent criminals get set out on the streets. It would be a violation of the ethical duty that we have as prosecutors to seek justice, which is an additional oath over all other attorneys, to say that we're going to base the way we do our job and the outcome we look for in a case on revenue. It's simply not true, while it may sound good to say it, nothing could be further from the truth.
Mr. Hassinger, your rebuttal.
Well, I would just say that that is what's going on. I mean, I see it. I interact with the state's attorney's office on a daily basis, and I interact with other organizational stakeholders within the office. And when you create a new domestic violence diversion program just because you lost grant funding, and then guarantee the county board that you're going to have $85,000 in revenue and new revenue coming in from this, then you've made a decision based on revenue. You haven't seen a case, you haven't seen a police report, any of the facts, but yet you're going to offer somebody into this program as a way to generate revenue. And to me, that's just not right. If the case doesn't warrant a full prosecution where you have proof beyond a reasonable doubt to secure conviction at trial, then you take another route. You don't put a squeeze on the person just to fund your office.
Gentlemen, it is now time for our closing statement. You each have 2 minutes to wrap up. Mr. Scott.
Thank you. Thanks again, Bill, for hosting this debate. My opponent wants to say there's a difference in the way we look at things as far as budgetary issues. I've never submitted a budget to the county board. I've never given anybody a pay raise. We see eye to eye on the need to wisely spend taxpayer dollars. The difference here is one of experience. Who is best qualified with prosecution experience to serve Macon County as its top prosecutor? This is not a political thing. I have supporters from all walks of life, from all political viewpoints. The supporters I have that are victims of the cases I've handled, I think, are the most important because they've seen firsthand how hard I'll fight for justice for them. I respect my opponent's service as a police officer, but when you compare service as a police officer to prosecution service, it's like comparing apples to oranges. They're two different professions within the same field. It's like comparing two people in the medical field, a nurse and a surgeon. They have different things, they complement each other, but they're not the same job. Experience is the most important thing you can look for in a state's attorney. The difference here is who's going to be better suited to serve public safety. I have 25 years of experience as a prosecutor at the highest level of my profession. My opponent has no prosecution experience, has never prosecuted a single case, and has been a lawyer for less than 2 years. This is a job for an experienced attorney. To lead that office, and this is a leadership position, you have to know the job. I know the job of prosecution. It's obvious by some of the things that have been said here today that my opponent doesn't understand how our office works, and he doesn't understand prosecution. The question I hope people take with them to the voting booth is, if heaven forbid, you are the victim of some terrible crime, which candidate would you want responsible for bringing you justice and representing you in court? And that's why I'm asking for your vote on November 6th.
Mr. Hassinger?
Thank you, Bill, again for hosting this, and Mr. Scott, thank you for being here today. This race is about justice, and like I said before in the beginning, I would not be running if I wasn't frustrated with the lack of public service. And when I say lack of public service, I mean access to the office. The community doesn't have enough access to the office. The lawyers don't have enough access to the office. There are attorneys up in that office that do not return phone calls, that do not return emails or written correspondence. And that's a problem. And when you have public service coupled with the financial problems that Mr. Scott has admitted that the office currently has, that's what frustrates justice, because justice is the end goal here. It's not about how many years you've been a prosecutor. If you want to do that, go be a trial lawyer and go in and prosecute felony cases. This is a job that needs a real leader that has experience and can bring a fresh new perspective to the office of Macon County State's Attorney. And that's why I hope on November 6th that everybody will vote for me, Dan Hassinger.
Gentlemen, I thank you, and the voters and citizens of Macon County thank you very much, and best of luck to you.
Thank you.